Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're listening, I bet I know what you're up to. You are deep in the study materials, right? Trying to cram everything in for that real estate exam.
Oh, yeah. It's a mountain of information, definitely. And if you're like most people studying, you've probably hit that section on government powers over private property.
And things start getting fuzzy.
Exactly. It all just blurs together. It's a really common sticking point, but you absolutely have to know it for the test.
Well, that's exactly what we're tackling today. We're doing a focused look, a real deep analysis of how government authority interacts with private property. Because there are, four main ways the government can step in: regulate, claim, influence your rights.
Yes, 4 fundamental powers. And luckily, there's a great little tool to remember them, a mnemonic.
Ah, yes. Can't beat a good mnemonic for exams.
You really need this one. PETE. P-E-T-E.
Okay.
P is for police power, E for eminent domain, T for taxation. And the last E is a sheet. Pete gives you the basic map.
Got it. So, Pete. And for this real estate exam deep dive, by Exam Scholar Real Estate Edition, we're focusing, really drilling down on the two that seem to cause the most headaches.
Police power and eminent domain.
Right. Why do these two get mixed up so often? They seem different on the surface.
Well, I think it's because in both situations, the government is definitely limiting what an owner can do with their property. Their full enjoyment is impacted. But here's the absolute key, the thing to remember for the exam. It really just boils down to the money.
Money, how so?
Simple. With one power, the government has to pay you. With the other, they regulate you and you get nothing. That financial piece, that's everything.
Okay, let's unpack that. That sounds like the core rule we need. So starting with the one where you don't get paid, that's police power, right? Like zoning or environmental rules?
Exactly. When your property is affected, regulated, maybe even severely restricted under police power. Thinking zoning setbacks, height limits, building codes, compensation is absolutely not required.
No check from the government.
0. You're essentially giving up some individual rights or potential uses for the greater good, the community's welfare, and you don't get compensated for that limitation. Now, contrast that directly with eminent domain.
Okay.
That's the government's power to actually take your private property for public use. And the Constitution, the Fifth Amendment, super clear here.
Clear how?
When the government uses eminent domain, they must pay just compensation. Must. That payment requirement, that's the single biggest difference you need to grasp.
All right, let's dive into the first one then. The P and P, police power. When I hear police power, I immediately think, law enforcement, cops. But in property law, it's much wider, isn't it?
Oh, much broader.
Yeah.
It's not about day-to-day policing. Police power, in this context, is the government's inherent constitutional authority. It comes from state constitutions, mostly. And it allows the government to create and enforce laws. Laws to promote public health, safety, morals, and the general welfare. It's about protecting the community, fundamentally, not about acquiring land itself.
And this power, it flows downwards, from the state to local governments.
That's right. The state vests, or delegates, this power to counties, cities, municipalities.
Yeah.
That's why your local town council can pass specific zoning ordinances or building codes, as long as, those local rules don't clash with state law.
Makes sense. And the exam will want concrete examples, I assume.
Oh, absolutely. You need practical examples of police power. Key ones are things like regulating land use through a general plan and specific zoning laws. That's a big one.
Wow.
Also setting building codes for safety, requiring licenses for real estate agents, regulating pollution, rent control measures, all of that. Classic police power.
It's interesting, though, you mentioned general welfare. That seems like it could cover a lot. Has the definition sort of stretched over time? I mean, zoning used to feel very much about, say, preventing a factory next to homes, direct safety, or nuisance. But now you see rules about aesthetics, right? Like paint colors or landscaping.
You've hit on a really key point there. The concept has broadened significantly. Courts have consistently said that general welfare isn't static. It evolves. And yes, it now definitely includes things like promoting the aesthetic beauty of the community, the overall quality of life.
So aesthetics are part of general welfare.
They can be. Courts have upheld ordinances, for example, that restrict billboards in scenic areas, or, like you said, require buildings to meet certain design standards through review boards. The reasoning is often tied back to, community appearance affects property values, tourism, the overall welfare. So it falls under police power.
Okay, but what if those regulations go really far? Like if the zoning makes it almost impossible for me to use my land profitably, isn't there a point where it becomes a taking, even if they don't call it that? I hear the term regulatory taking.
Yes. That's the really fine line and where lots of legal battles happen. If a government regulation under police power is so extreme that it wipes out essentially all reasonable economic use of the property,
Yeah.
making it practically worthless,
Then what?
then it can potentially be challenged in court as a regulatory taking. And if the court agrees, the government might actually be forced to pay compensation, just like under eminent domain. But, and this is crucial for the exam, most land use regulations, your standard zoning, building codes, they're almost always upheld as valid police power. No payment due. Regulatory takings are the exception, not the rule.
Okay, that distinction is vital. Now, you mentioned protecting public safety. What about the really extreme cases? Can the government actually damage or destroy property under police power without paying?
Yes. And this is often a shocker for people, but it's a powerful illustration of this authority. Think about a major fire, maybe in a row of townhouses or condos.
Okay.
To stop the fire from spreading and save the rest of the block, the fire department might have to intentionally break down walls, flood, or even demolish an adjacent unit that isn't on fire yet to create a fire break.
Wow. So they destroy perfectly good property to save others.
Exactly. That destruction, that intentional destruction, is considered a legitimate act under police power, necessary for public safety, for the general welfare.
And the owner of that destroyed unit, they just lose out. No compensation from the city or the fire department.
Correct. From the government, constitutionally, no compensation is required in that specific emergency scenario. Because it wasn't a taking for public use like building a road. It was a regulation, an action for public safety.
That seems incredibly harsh for that owner.
It is. Now, practically speaking, that owner isn't necessarily left with nothing. They'd likely file an insurance claim, maybe against the policy of the unit where the fire started or their own homeowner's policy. But the key legal point for the exam is the government itself doesn't owe just compensation under the Fifth Amendment in that situation. The principle of necessity.
Passing the real estate exam can be hard, like really hard. Statistically, only about 50% of people actually pass the real estate exam on their first try. Those people that pass, they go on to become real estate agents. And the people that didn't pass, yeah, they either give up completely or have to try again. Both of these options are painful, disappointing, and upsetting. Exam Scholar Real Estate Edition has been named as the best real estate exam prep by multiple publications for 7 years in a row. If you are about to take the real estate exam, Exam Scholar Real Estate Edition is a no-brainer choice. There is no other real estate exam preparation service out there that comes close. To enjoy the longest membership time, lowest cost, real estate videos, audios, articles, flashcards, vocabulary, exam tips and tricks, a 1-year no questions asked refund policy, and be one of the 35,000 people that it has helped pass the real estate exam, then sign up in less than 5 minutes at www.realestateexamscholar.com.
It protects the government's action.
Okay, that's a really stark difference. Regulating or even destroying for safety versus taking the land for a project. That seems like the perfect bridge to the other EMP, eminent domain. This is where they do want the land itself.
Precisely. Eminent domain is the government's right, federal, state, local, to take private property, to acquire it, provided, of course, that the taking is for a legitimate public use.
And public use is pretty broad, too, isn't it? We're talking schools, roads.
Oh, yeah. Schools, highways, parks, public buildings, utility lines, railroads, streets, pretty much any kind of public infrastructure or facility.
And can any private property be taken? Or are some exempt?
No exemptions. That's a key fact. Doesn't matter if it's your home, your business, a farm, vacant land. If the government determines it's needed for a valid public purpose, they have the power to take it.
So what's the process? Do they just show up with a check?
Well, ideally, they negotiate first. They'll appraise the property and make the owner an offer. If the owner agrees, it's a voluntary sale and acquisition. Simple enough. But if the owner refuses the offer, or they just can't agree on a price,
Then what?
then the government has to go to court. They initiate a formal legal process called condemnation.
Condemnation. Okay, so that's the lawsuit to force the sale.
Essentially, yes. Condemnation is the legal action that enforces the right of eminent domain. It's how the government actually takes title to the property. And this is where the property owner, even though they usually can't stop the taking itself, does have some rights.
What can they argue about in court? If they can't just say, no, you can't have my land, what's left to fight over?
There are two main grounds for challenging the condemnation, and you need to know these. First, the owner could argue that the government's intended use isn't really a proper public use. Maybe it primarily benefits a private developer, for instance.
Does that argument work often?
Honestly, not very often these days. Courts tend to interpret public use very broadly, deferring to the government's judgment. But it's a possible argument. The second and much more common argument is about the money.
The compensation amount.
Exactly. The owner argues that the government's appraisal, their offer, is too low, that it doesn't represent just compensation for the property being taken. Most condemnation battles are fought over the valuation.
Okay, speaking of the money, this is where it gets detailed, right? The exam probably tests the specifics of just compensation, what's included, and maybe more importantly, what's not included.
Absolutely. Test writers love this stuff. The government pays the fair market value of the property being taken, land, buildings, fixtures. But, crucially, they do not typically pay for things like lost business profits.
Ouch. So if my store is taken, I get paid for the building, but not for the income I'm losing because I have to close down or move.
That's generally correct. No compensation for lost profits or business goodwill or the inconvenience and cost of having to relocate. It's focused purely on the value of the real estate itself. That can be a really tough pill to swallow for business owners.
Definitely. Is there anything else factored into the compensation besides the basic property value?
Yes, and this is a really important one, especially when they don't take your entire property. It's called severance damages.
Severance damages. What's that?
This applies when the government only takes a part of your property. Let's say they need a strip along the front of your lot to widen the road.
Right. So they take maybe 10 feet off the front.
Okay, they pay you just compensation for that 10-foot strip they took. But what if taking that strip makes the rest of your property less useful or valuable?
Like maybe now the remaining lot is too small to build on according to zoning. Or access is much harder.
Exactly. The taking of the part has severed or damaged the value of the remainder. Severance damages are awarded to compensate the owner for that loss in value to the property they still own. So the total compensation would be value of the part taken, PLUS severance damages for the loss in value to the remainder. It's a critical concept.
That makes big difference.
Yeah.
Got it. Now, what about other claims on the property? Like if there's a mortgage on it, or maybe a contractor filed a lien. What happens to those when the government takes title through condemnation?
Good question. Those liens and encumbrances don't just vanish into thin air, but they are terminated as claims against the property itself. Once the government gets title, the property is usually cleared of those prior claims.
So the mortgage lender just loses out?
No. Their claim essentially transfers. Instead of having a claim against the land, they now have a claim against the money the government paid. The condemnation award, the just compensation money, effectively stands in place of the property. So the lender, the lien holder, anyone with a valid prior claim gets paid out of that condemnation fund before the owner gets the rest.
Okay, the money replaces the land for claim purposes. That makes sense. What about tenants? If someone's leasing the property that gets condemned?
Yeah, leases are affected too. Typically, if a significant portion of the leased property is taken under eminent domain, making it unusable for the tenant's purpose, the lease agreement gives the tenant the right to cancel the lease.
Without penalty?
Usually, yes. They wouldn't be expected to keep paying rent on a property they can no longer effectively use because the government's taking.
Okay, wow. We've covered a lot of ground there, really contrasting police power and eminent domain. Let's try to sum up that core difference one last time, just to really cement it.
Absolutely. The simplest takeaway is this. Police power is about the authority to regulate. Regulate for health, safety, welfare. The consequence for the owner. Potential limitation or even loss with no compensation. It's a financial risk you bear.
Regulate, no pay.
Right. Then, eminent domain is the power to take, to acquire property for public use. The consequence, a guaranteed payout. Just compensation is constitutionally mandated. Sometimes that even includes extra amounts like severance damages.
Take must pay.
That's the fundamental split you have to remember. Nailing down Pete, and especially this distinction between police power and eminent domain, is just non-negotiable for passing that exam.
That clarity is exactly what you need. Hopefully, this helps you feel more confident as you keep studying.
Keep reviewing that difference. Regulation versus taking, no pay versus pay, it will show up.
And hey, if you feel like you need more on the other parts of Pete the T for taxation, the final E for S sheet, or want more practice questions and drills on all these government powers and other tricky topics, definitely check out our full exam prep course. You can find everything over at www.realestateexamscholar.com.
That's www.realestateexamscholar.com.
Great resource to really solidify your understanding.
Definitely. And, before we wrap up, here's something extra for you to think about, kind of building on what we discussed. We talked about severance damages for a partial taking, right?
Yeah.
Compensating for the loss in value to the remaining property.
Yeah.
So here's the thought. If you were a realtor advising someone whose property might face a partial taking, how would you even begin to estimate those potential severance damages?
Yeah.
How does the taking impact the highest and best use of what's left? Does it change how marketable the remaining piece is? Maybe affect its zoning potential? It's a complex valuation puzzle in the real world.
That's a really practical angle to consider. Something to definitely mull over. All right, that's all the time we have for this deep dive. Remember, knowing this stuff is one thing, but really understanding how it applies is where the value lies. Good luck with your studying.
Keep up the great work.